With a lot of the men that I treat, as their body by any objective standard is actually getting closer to the ideal, their body image, strangely enough, gets worse. Maybe I need to gain 10 more pounds of muscle, and then I'll feel confident and I'll feel that, and then nope, it's not coming, so maybe 10 more pounds, will do it. And that can lead some people down a real dark path.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today's guest is Dr. Roberto Olivardia, a clinical psychologist at Harvard Medical School and the author of the Adonis Complex. We talk about the paradox of how men are more muscular than ever before, and yet, because of technology and societal pressure, more men than ever are reporting that they're dissatisfied with their bodies. And this is leading to some pretty extreme behavior. Everything from bringing Tupperware to weddings, to teenagers taking steroids, to skipping the birth of one's child in order to finish a workout. This conversation was absolutely eye-opening. If you care about fitness, you do not want to miss this. So, without further ado, I give you Dr. Roberto Olivardia. So, Dr. Olivardia, what made me decide to reach out to you was I heard this story about this fitness influencer called David Lade. And he was talking about how when he was in high school, he was this skinny kid, very low confidence, and he started working out to become more confident. And when he was 14, he became viral for all these body transformational videos. But at a certain point, even as his body was getting better, he was starting to notice more and more flaws. And he started to dislike himself as it went along, even though his body was looking like an absolute Adonis, to the point where he was feeling depressed and didn't like himself as soon as the camera turned off. So I thought, wow, this is a really fascinating psychology, because you would think the better you look, the better you would feel, but that's not always the case.
That's correct. And that's in the work that I do with patients. I mean, those are a lot of the patients that I see who their sense is that, okay, well, if I feel better at, level 7, I'm going to feel even better at level 8, even more at level 9, even more at level 10 and 10 plus, that more is always better. And that's not the case, that there is a sort of, sometimes these diminishing returns. With a lot of the men that I treat, it sometimes gets worse. Their body image, strangely enough, gets worse as their body by any objective standard is actually getting closer to the ideal, which is really not different, Steve, from what we see with women and men who have anorexia, that interestingly, as they lose weight, their body image becomes worse. And, so it gets to this point, it's like, oh, I'm not feeling what I was hoping to feel. So maybe I need to lose 10 more pounds and then I'm going to feel better. And then they don't. They feel just worse and more depressed and more anxious. And it's like, maybe I need to lose 10 more pounds. This is on the other end. Maybe I need to gain 10 more pounds of muscle, and then I'll feel confident and I'll feel that. And then nope, it's not coming. So maybe 10 more pounds, will do it. And that can lead some people down a real dark path.
It's really paradoxical, right? Because when I was in high school, I remember hearing this lyric from Kanye West where he said, "We live in the American dream. The people highest up got the lowest self-esteem." And it never made much sense to me. And then I look at someone like David, or these, very objectively beautiful people, supermodels who talk about they have all these insecurities. And I'm guessing it's some kind of spiral where the more you put your identity and self-worth in your looks, the more you fixate and focus on it, and therefore the more flaws you see, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse.
That's absolutely true. It just gets, your world becomes that. And so, it's almost like when we think about even, how we see ourselves, there's like the whole, or the gestalt, we call it, of how we see ourselves. But people who, if so much of their identity rests on that, then their body image becomes all these parts. So if you're staring, for example, at your nose in the mirror for a half an hour, you're going to see things that are so minute that other people just aren't even processing, because your nose is just part of the whole of who you are. So for that person who's more prone to, certain clinical, issues and negative body image, they'll say, oh yeah, no, that nose, I don't like that this nostril is bigger, than the other. It's asymmetrical and that's not perfect. And if it's perfect, then everything will, this idea, again, this notion that if things look perfect, then I will be immunized from criticism. I will be immunized from rejection. I'll be immunized from anxiety. And that's just not the case. That, all that does, if we have a certain kind of body is, it's a certain aesthetic, but it doesn't protect us from any of those things.
Yeah, recently I was looking through some old photo albums with some friends, and they saw some photos of me from about a decade ago when I was really obsessed about getting shredded abs. And I was calorie counting and working out 2 hours a day and all this. And I got down to 9% body fat and 0% visceral fat. And I looked great, but I wasn't happy.
Right.
And one of the friends said, oh, wow, you must have been really popular with the ladies during that time, right? And I kind of laughed because I said, actually, it was the opposite.
Yep.
Because I was so in my head and I was so just fixated on my own body that the neediness and the insecurities were just wafting out of me, that people could smell it and it wasn't attractive. Whereas there were other points in my life where when I just wasn't in my head, I was focused on other parts of my life. Mm-hmm. Tim Ferriss calls this diversifying your identity. Instead of diversifying your portfolio, diversifying your identity. And even though my body didn't look as good, I felt a lot better about myself and my social life was infinitely better.
Absolutely. And this is where it's important, especially in the social media world that we live in, that just because somebody's body might be sort of regarded as attractive, ideal, you got the six pack, of abs, but that doesn't translate. And the assumption is that it's going to translate to happiness, to better relationship opportunities. But the fact of the matter is somebody could find you attractive, but not be attracted to you in a relational sense. Because to your point, like what I hear in studies that I've done with, and how women feel, and certainly clinically with the patients that I work with, their girlfriends, wives, boyfriends, that will say, like, this is not a person I want to be in a relationship with, because all they're thinking about is the way they look, and there's no room for me in that relationship. Interestingly, in studies I've shown that women often find that, men who are almost like too consumed by it are like self-centered. They regard them as being very self-centered. A lot of women worry, well, if that's how they feel about their bodies, how are they going to think about the flaws in my body? So yeah, I can acknowledge this guy's an attractive guy. He might be hot. I might press the like button, but that doesn't mean I want to be in a relationship with someone like that. And that's an important key, because at the end of the day, all of us are seeking the same things. We're all seeking validation. We want to feel like we belong somewhere. We want to connect with people. We want to be in relationships that affirm us, that give us a good sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So it's not I don't never blame or cast judgment on the individual in that pursuit. I think the problem is that people think, oh, I'm going to get those things if I, shred my body down and everything is consuming in that way, versus like if somebody is working on an exercise routine and it's just a part of their life, like you were saying, a diversified portfolio of, and they're also hanging out with their friends and they're, working and they're doing these things. Great. There's, again, nothing is wrong with having, a six pack of abs. Nothing is wrong with being an avid weightlifter. Nothing is wrong with watching what you eat. I mean, in fact, those are good things, because, we have a lot of medical conditions that are associated with obesity and poor eating behavior and things like that. But when it's sold to a person as, okay, yeah, I'm going to gain all this confidence, it's not that different sometimes of how we look at money. Very wealthy people are not necessarily happier people. And in fact, with a lot of people I've worked with over the years, are sometimes even more unhappy because there's the notion of, well, I have all of this money, why aren't I happy? And there's almost a different variable of frustration that comes along with that. And I see that with people who have aesthetics, bodies in which they're like, okay, I got the 6-pack of abs and I have the biceps and I even have people complimenting me, but I'm not happy and I'm not taking advantage of like, oh yeah, I'm going to now go into this relationship because, as you mentioned, they're so consumed by it that they are never really present. They're not really exuding any of their personality out there in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much good stuff here to unpack. It really, really clicked when you said the difference between attractive and attracted. Mm-hmm. I remember reading somewhere that the actress Anna Faris was talking about her husband, Chris Pratt, who, when he was a fat comedian, she actually liked him a lot more because he was fun. He was just like, living in the moment. Like you said, he was present. He was carefree. And then when he got shredded for his Marvel superhero movie and he was, the people's sexiest man alive and all of that, she actually found him a lot less fun because he was always just anxious about his calories and he couldn't eat a sandwich and all that. So this really, really tracks. Mm-hmm. Why don't we define a few terms for the audience? Sure. Because you mentioned anorexia earlier, but then there's also body image dysmorphia, as well as muscle dysmorphia, which you and your colleagues coined in the book, The Adonis Complex.
Sure. So anorexia nervosa, as people may know, is an eating disorder that's characterized by restrictive eating or basically people starving themselves. And it's often in the pursuit of ridding the body of fat and thinness, although there could be other psychological mechanisms. Then in the case of body dysmorphic disorder, which is a psychiatric condition that's where people have a preoccupation with a part of their appearance. It could be their hair, their skin, their penis size, their legs. It could be literally any part of their body. And that preoccupation is, you often have body image distortion. So people are seeing themselves or perceiving themselves in ways that are very different than how other people would see it. They're having a lot of obsessive thoughts about that body part, a lot of compulsions, things like mirror checking, maybe, manipulating that body part in a certain way, camouflaging behaviors if they think that body part looks ugly or unattractive. And again, by negative, it's more than just, oh, I don't like that part of my body. With people with BDD, they think it looks ugly, like offensive, deformed. And again, very big disparity between how they see it and how other people see it. Now, when we talk about body image, that body image is something we all have. And so body image is basically these components of how we see ourselves in our heads. Like, what's the picture you have in your head of how you look? But more than just the picture, it's also how do you think about how you look? What are the thoughts that you have around it? What are the emotions you have around it? What are the ways that you think other people, see you? How do you evaluate that? And what is the overall value you have of that? Because the truth is, Steve, like, not everyone has a huge value on the way they look. I mean, there are some people that really don't care. It's just their body image is just like, as long as I have a healthy body and I can do X, Y, and Z, whatever, and then there are people that really, really, really care. And most of us are in between, where we want to look presentable and look a certain way. We feel great when we're in a nice, suit or fancy dress, or whatnot. And that's fine. There's nothing, wrong with that. But when body image, where it starts to lapse into more body image distortions and disorders and things like BDD, is when the value becomes like stronger. When you notice the thoughts are, oh, I'm so ugly. Oh, I'm so this, I'm so that. And you're picking yourself apart. Now, muscle dysmorphia is a term that we coined in the mid-90s. And muscle dysmorphia is a subtype of body dysmorphic disorder, but it's focused on muscle mass. And this came out of really research I was doing of eating disorders in men. So men who had anorexia, bulimia, where people binge eat and then purge either through vomiting or laxative use or excessive exercise. And I got a lot of calls from men that said, I used to have anorexia when I was a teenager, but I never really wanted to be thin. I wanted to be lean. And so I starved myself, but I didn't like the way I looked. I didn't want to look emaciated, but I just wanted to rid my body of body fat. And they said it was almost as if the pendulum swung in the other direction, where they were just as obsessed with calories, except they were taking them in as opposed to just starving themselves, but then obsessively lifting weights. And now they're muscular guys, but they fear they look too small. They fear they look puny or weak. So we first thought, oh, is this, maybe we'll call it reverse anorexia. But because it's not inherently an eating disorder, it's more a type of BDD, that we then called it muscle dysmorphia. So these are primarily men, although there are some women with muscle dysmorphia who, despite the fact that they are muscular, that other people might be like, whoa, you're jacked, you have that six pack. They don't see it that way. They just think of all the flaws, how it could be better. They fear if they don't keep up their compulsions that their body's going to shrink. If they eat the wrong kind of food, it's going to result in, losing muscle mass, very, very quickly. And just to point out, it's desperate for them. Like there's a desperation around it. Like one day feels to them as if they can lose like 10 pounds of muscle mass. Like it feels like that. And the promise of muscle dysmorphia, and similar to what you see with eating disorders, is I'm going to feel more powerful, more confident, more strong. And that's not the case. I mean, if anything, these men end up feeling worse and worse and worse. And then they get into things like steroid use and other very unhealthy sort of ways to modify their appearance.
So what are some of the symptoms? Because I've read in your book and in other sources some pretty extreme behaviors, everything from bringing Tupperware to weddings to skipping vacations because there's no serious gym at the destination, to wearing hoodies in the summer. And what are some of the hallmark symptoms of muscle dysmorphia?
So the main part is, so you have the body image distortion. Mm-hmm. So again, they're not seeing themselves the way that other people see them. And these are not guys who are like, they really do see themselves that way, but they're fishing for compliments. No, this is not that. Like they really think they look scrawny, puny, skinny. And even if for a moment they see themselves as looking muscular, for them, they feel as if all that can be lost like very, very quickly. So they're never rested. They don't, they never feel comfortable. Then you have obsessive thoughts around it. So this is something that is with them like all day long. So, and those obsessive thoughts could be, am I eating what I'm supposed to eat? Am I exercising how I'm supposed to exercise? If I'm in a room with people, oh, they're probably noticing like my calf muscles don't look particularly strong, or, oh, they probably notice I look smaller today than I did yesterday. And so all of these like obsessive thoughts, what should I do? Oh, I'm supposed to go on vacation. How am I going to keep up my routine on vacation? I'm going to have to bring all of my food and and it just goes on and on. Then compulsive behaviors, mirror checking, taking selfies constantly, reassurance seeking. So that could be where you're asking somebody else, like, do I look big today? Like, do I look as big as I did yesterday? Am I bigger than that guy? But it could be so endless that partners of patients of mine will call me and say, this needs to stop. Like, I am literally going out of my mind, like with my son, brother, husband, boyfriend, asking me in the last hour 100 times, if he's big, if he looks too small. And then there's avoidant behavior. So as you were mentioning, like, these are not the guys that are at Venice Beach proudly taking their shirts off and showing their physique. They're like wearing hoodies and long sleeve shirts in 90-degree weather because they think their arms look too scrawny. They are not leaving the house sometimes because they feel out of shape. Not going to work. I've had patients who go at real extremes. Yeah, they will, bring Tupperware of their own food. And, we know that certainly like people, like any competitive athlete, that's not an unusual thing for a competitive athlete. They're on a certain diet. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking in sort of the day-to-day sort of lifestyle that becomes more and more and more restrictive. The compulsion to exercise and go, to the gym, to lift weights to a point where it's very unhealthy. Like there are diminishing returns. We're not meant to lift weights 6-7 hours a day. And when your body does lift weights for 6 to 7 hours a day, you're going to be in a lot of pain. And there are a number of these men that then develop problems with substance use, things like opiate use, particularly because to deal with chronic pain. And so then you now have a whole substance abuse problem. You have about 50% of these men will use anabolic steroids because these are substances, synthetic derivatives of testosterone, which will build muscle mass, but they have a whole host of physical and psychological consequences to it. I had a patient many years ago, actually, he was not a patient, he was in a research study that I did, who said that he goes, this is like, I feel like I'm imprisoned by this. He goes, it started off with like, I wanted to build my body to just feel more confident because this was a man who had social anxiety throughout his adolescence, felt very rejection sensitive. And he said, if I built this body, then I'd be immune to that. And it just made it worse and worse. And he joined this research study because he said, I need help because I missed the birth of my first child because I was at the gym when I got the call that my wife's water broke. And like, I couldn't wait for my, child to be born. And any other man, he said, would have left the gym right there and then, gotten, got in their car, got in the hospital. I couldn't stop finishing my regimen, my workout, because in that moment, it felt more threatening for me to lose muscle mass than it was to miss the birth of my child. And he missed it. And that's something he has to live with. And he felt awful about that. And someone could look at that and think, oh, well, this guy's an ass, for doing, but this isn't that. This is something that is like, feels so compelling, and that's why, it's a psychiatric disorder. So there's a lot of conflict around it. And then the truth is that there is a lot of ambivalence that these men might have about seeking treatment, because part of the treatment will be, we don't want you working out 6 hours a day. We don't want you on anabolic steroids, but we see that with eating disorders too. I mean, that there's a lot of ambivalence around treatment. Substance abuse, there's a lot of ambivalence around it because people know that they need help. And at the same time, the fear of, oh my gosh, but if the help is, I know that I can't keep up with some of these things, then that means my body is going to change potentially in a way I don't want it to. And I fear that happening.
This patient that you mentioned, the compulsion, it makes me think about how we have these unhealthy behaviors that are not caught because they're socially rewarded. A really good example is those hyper-competitive Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant types. Mm-hmm. Their killer instinct and their competitiveness. And I'm a big fan of both of these guys, but it's not like Michael and Kobe have more willpower or more work ethic than anybody else. It's more that they can't help but to do that thing. They have a compulsion where they have to go practice and they have to, shoot 1,000 shots before 4 a.m. or something. And their teammates, they affectionately call them sickos because they literally can't not do the thing. But It's a very socially rewarding behavior that they don't really catch that it's actually something quite unhealthy. And with a lot of this muscle stuff, it seems like because you're getting praised for your big muscles, that, oh, this isn't actually a really unhealthy thing that you're doing.
Yeah, and that's what makes muscle dysmorphia very different than, let's say, something like anorexia. Because with something like anorexia, you see someone who's emaciated. Most people are going to say that is not healthy. Like, no one's going, someone might reward someone who loses 10, 20 pounds if they were, let's say, overweight. But when you're losing 10, 20 pounds in an already thin body, no one's going to be like, you look great when you look, if anything, I mean, we see this with celebrities now with Ozempic that, and I'm not saying this is right, but people will be like, oh, they look awful. They look like, the crypt keeper or whatever. And I'm not down with people sort of saying negative things like that around people. But with muscle dysmorphia, you're right in that you don't think of, a 6 foot, 250 pound, 8% body fat guy as having like an issue. We would say, oh, wow, he's so disciplined. He has willpower. And I'm not taking away the fact that, people, again, who have very dedicated exercise routines or fitness routines, that's wonderful. Like it does take a certain level of executive function, of discipline, of perseverance to do that. I'm not taking, or, athletes, but the issue is more of what's the end goal here? Because like, I don't think anyone would then, if let's say, for that research participant would say, oh, he missed the birth of his child. Oh, wow, that's great discipline. You're not going to have a lot of people that are going to be on board with that. So with a lot of work that I do with patients is what is the value that we're really trying to fulfill here? Because I can tell you, I've been working for over 30 years. I've been working with men with eating disorders, with body dysmorphic disorder, with muscle dysmorphia. And never has it been that the ultimate value is to look a certain way. The ultimate value is I want to look this way so that, and then this is where the real work is, so that I could, find a relationship, so that I can just feel comfortable in my body, so that I can feel like I have permission to be assertive. So that I can get better job opportunities. So, okay, the value then are the things that we all want. We all want healthy relationships. We want good career aspirations. But the idea that not only the only, but that a viable route to those things is this obsession with the body. That's not true. Like there are lots of people who are super successful that do not have a six pack of abs. Like there are a lot of people that are in very happy marriages and relationships that, don't have to look like a certain way. But the most striking example of this, Steve, is, again, this was, I think, the very first research study I did with muscle dysmorphia. And this was someone who gave me permission very early on. I think we might have mentioned it. I wrote about it in Adonis Complex. And he was in his mid to late 20s. He was in law school and, working out 5 to 6 hours a day at the gym. He was stacking 4 or 5 different types of anabolic steroids. He had a kidney that was at risk for him losing because of the anabolic steroid use. Developed cystic acne. His testicles shrank to the size of raisins. He had erectile dysfunction. He was losing his hair. He had gynecomastia, breast enlargement from use of the steroids. He got addicted to Nubain, which is a painkiller because he was working out so much. And it's, Nubain is a cousin of heroin. It's an opiate. And nicest guy. Super bright, really nice guy. And I said, what is the ultimate value here? Like, what is the end game for you? And he said, he goes, to get chicks. And that's what he said. He goes, I just want, to have women and, to live the life. Now, keeping in mind, this is before social media. This is in 1996. Now it's exploded with social media, which we can get into. But I said, okay, and I wasn't saying this to mock him in any way, but to really almost help him see the bigger picture. I said, you're telling me though, you're at the gym 5 to 6 hours a day and you're you're not there to pick up women. You're there because you're so perfectionistically focused on this. And then after you leave the gym, you're trying to do your law school classes. You're exhausted because of just this. You're taking pain medication. You can barely walk afterwards. And then all of these consequences from this routine, from the anabolic steroid use, erectile dysfunction, everything. Is that working? Are you meeting women? Are you going? And he sort of laughed and he said, and I 100%, this helped me in my journey as a clinician to understand. He said, because I never thought about it. I never thought that. I never thought about it that way. He goes, no, he goes, honestly, like, what am I even going to do? He goes, I can't even get it up because of what I'm doing to my body. Like, he goes, I'm not going out on dates. He goes, I'm so, like, he goes, I feel like a disabled person in terms of in my body. It is so riddled with so much pain. I walk up the stairs and I can hear my knees like an 80-year-old person. Like, and he's thinking, and he goes, yeah, I never thought of that. He goes, and this is what for me really was the epitome of it, is like you get so caught up in it that you almost are losing track of like, what is this for? Like, what am I doing this for? Because it starts to feel like, no, what I'm doing it for is to just achieve the body, achieve the body, achieve the body. But it's like, no, but that's not really the end goal. You know, it's always, what do you feel that's going to grant you by having that body? And I can tell you, many of these guys had social anxiety when they were younger or even as adults. I said, no, you can be an assertive person regardless of what your body looks like. So assertiveness skills training will be some of the treatment. For some of these men, they have histories of trauma. They were bullied. They were sexually abused. They were physically abused. Men who are gay were bullied and, you know, for sort of homophobic violence. So building a body had a very deep meaning to them of no one is going to mess with me but yet internally they still felt like wounded, you know, kids. And so I'm like, no, the trauma informed work will help with that. You know, the building the body doesn't fix all the holes in the soul, you know, in that sense. But that man, I will never forget him because he was such a bright, funny, intelligent person who would have no problem getting a woman, you know, getting a date if he were not so consumed with the muscle dysmorphia. And the fact that that didn't even come to him, I did not look at that as like, oh my gosh, this guy's not intelligent at all. I thought, wow, this is what this disorder does, is it has people not even, they lose such sight of the insight of it.
It's a really important point in terms of us just missing the point of why we're doing the thing in the first place. When I was in high school, I was moving around a lot as a kid, so you get kind of destabilized and socially anxious. And when I first got to high school, I had this grand plan because I was just socially anxious. I didn't really, know how to talk to people. I thought, if I just became a really great basketball player, then everyone will like me, all the guys will respect me, and the girls will like me and all this. And it wasn't until maybe like a decade after graduation when I did become a very socially comfortable person that I thought back, I could have just skipped all this circuitous route and went right to socializing with people without the basketball thing where I was just locking myself in the gym. Everyone else went to hang out and I went to the gym. And it's very much we are sacrificing the thing we want for the thing that we think will get the thing we want.
Yes.
And the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you today was because I think a lot of what's happening on the internet with these influencers is really doing young men a great disservice.
Yes.
Because when a person is lost, they will latch on to even the wrong thing rather than believe that there's no path out. And one of the easiest things for these influencers to make content with is by saying the gym will fix every problem in your life. The gym will get you friends, girls, money. It will solve your insecurities. It will solve absolutely everything. But by getting so obsessed and then we get so into the weeds and we miss the forest, we end up socially isolating ourselves and missing the original point. And it's this very kind of slow, pernicious knife because you don't really even notice it happening. It's just,
that's right.
You slowly get obsessed. And before you know it, like your patient that was in the study lost all his hair and testicles are size of raisins. And it's just completely, basically ruined his life for this thing that he thinks will get him that other thing that he could have just directly went for.
100%. I can tell you in social media, came on board as a thing, it was like night and day in a not good way. Just the exacerbation of these issues and seeing boys younger than I've ever seen who have access to so much, I'm not even going to say information, misinformation and disinformation. One of my intake questions when I'm working with a male who's struggling with these issues is I ask them who they follow on social media, because I learn a lot by if they're following your Liver King or your Clavicular or your Andrew Tate's, and I'm like, oh, okay. So if you're seeing someone smashing their face, with a hammer, in their jaw, and that's so normalized, and we know how these algorithms work in social media, that they're, these businesses profit over sending content that they know people are going to get more and more interested in. So you get sucked into this like hole. It does become so normalized with people that I find I have my credibility with my credentials and my degree is on the same level as Clavicular. So that's what I'm up against. So a lot of conversations with young patients is really around almost just talking about how they're consuming, this media and what do they believe, and I have to establish myself in a way, and not that I didn't before, because I think, every clinician, obviously, we want to build a rapport and whatnot. But the idea that I have to undo a lot of misinformation, that's something I did not have to do years ago. Every now and then people will be like, oh, I heard this thing was good to eat a lot of. And you're like, no, this study actually shows X, Y, and Z. And people be like, okay. But now it's like, oh, no, this is what all these people are doing. And then they can see 30,000 people liked it. So they'll say, who are you, Dr. O? You're not the 30,000 people. This is. But it goes back to that point of what is it that you're looking for? And that's what I ask, my patients. And they'll first say, oh, I just want to look, more manly, more masculine, more this, more that. Okay, but and what? And then what? That's the part that a lot of people haven't even gone beyond that. And some people do. Some people be like, so that I can have better job opportunities, so that I won't ever get rejected. And I tell them right off the bat, there is literally nothing you can immunize yourself from rejection, at all. You will be rejected at some point. So why don't we work on how you deal with rejection rather than this very fragile process of oh, I hope I don't get rejected. I hope I don't get rejected. I hope I don't, because then you're coming from a place of real disempowerment. And that's the paradox, right? Is here are guys that, other people would think, oh, they must be so super confident because they have this body or whatnot. But in their internal state, they're right on a thread where all that can be taken away, because they really don't have the skills, a lot of them, to deal with rejection, with asking for something that they assume just because they look a certain way that they'll be granted that. Yeah, sometimes that happens if you look pretty and if you look, that people will give you things and whatnot, but that's not always going to be the case. And the things that are the more important, in a relationship, that's not going to fly in the same way.
So what are some alternative ways, some healthier ways for these men to live where they don't have to completely cut gym out of their life altogether, but just some alternative ways to look at it? Especially, you mentioned how muscle dysmorphia is often just a symptom, but what are the underlying issues that we should address?
Yeah, so to highlight what you said, in no way is this about, oh, don't work out and don't derive any value from whether it's your aesthetics or your physical fitness. No, again, there's nothing wrong with that. You're in the majority of people that want to look good and want to feel good in their bodies. But when it starts to cross a line where it's getting in the way of other things in your life, where certainly if you're causing harm now to your body, well, then that's not really fulfilling. If you're noticing that your self-talk is more negative when you look in the mirror, oh, I look like this and that, on a consistent basis, that's problematic. Have it be one part, but asking yourself, what are the main values that I'm really seeking in my life? Like, what are the things that are important? And your example was a great one about if, having more social relationships and more connection, that's the value. So if will working out and, having a workout regimen make me feel more confident in my body, and if I feel more confident, I might be more social. Sure, that works to an extent, and it's the regulation of these things. It's not calling for elimination; it's regulation. What other things? And like you said, if you weren't always at the basketball court, and it's like, well, if I want to be social, I gotta be in these social situations, and that's how we learn to be more social. That's how we learn skills, of doing that. So a lot of what these social media influencers sell is this idea that, oh, follow my advice and do this, and you're going to have access to all the girls and to all the money and to and it's like, well, no, that's not, how it works. And are you going to be seen as attractive by, women or whatnot by looking a certain way? Sure. But going back to that point but is that what you're looking for? Is just people to be like, hey, you're attractive, end of story? Or, hey, you're attractive and I want to go out on a date with you and I want to develop, a relationship. Of course, it's the more quote unquote masculine thing to get and want as much sex, as you can. But the truth is, and this is even teenage boys that I work with, and some of them, it's almost like a shameful thing for them to say. They're like, no, I'd really like to have that one person that I really connect with. And, but like, I don't tell my friends that, they'll say like it's shameful because these influencers often have very polygamous relationships. And again, no judgment. If that is what somebody wants to do, I am not here to judge how people live their lives. Where I come in is I want people to have happy, healthy lives. And if that's happy and healthy, fine. But with a lot of the people I work with, they're not happy and they're certainly not healthy. And that's where I think it's, important, because I always want to stress that, like, it's not, people can do, what they want to do, but with social media and these influencers, they're promising something that really is kind of a falsehood at the end of the day. Because honestly, Steve, like, in 5 years, we're not going to know any of these influencers. We know they're good. They're replaceable. Like, they're very few. I mean, I remember when Liver King, I had a lot of young patients talking about Liver King, and I don't know what he's going through now, but apparently he's going through something really terrible, and I hope he gets the help, that he needs, but he's replaced. Like, there's this new people sort of coming along. So what is that, So now it's, if, these people who are giving you this kind of advice, like, they're kind of going to be irrelevant in a not in a human worth and dignity perspective, but irrelevant from a pop culture sphere perspective tomorrow. And so we have to be aware of that. Like, what are we really seeking?
Well, thank you, Doctor. For people who want to get to know more and do a little bit more reading and research, where can people find your work?
So I'm sort of a dinosaur where I don't have any social media or a website. My kids tell me, Dad, you got to have, social media or website. But if you just Google, put my name in YouTube, there are lots of podcasts, webinars that I did about, this is one of my big areas of specialty. I also specialize in things like ADHD and learning disabilities and OCD, of which there's also a lot of intersectionality with a lot of these things, because many of the men I work with muscle dysmorphia have ADHD, have depression, have OCD, have social anxiety disorder, that these things often don't travel alone. So yeah, if you'll see like different videos or podcasts, that I've done. And then, the book I co-wrote, Adonis Complex, which I can't believe was 26 years ago, which is crazy to me. And I would say, honestly, everything that's in that book is still fairly relevant. The only thing that's not in that book that if we ever did an updated version would be the social media component. Because of course, back then there was no social media. But honestly, I went through that book recently and I'm like, a lot of the stuff we talk about is still pretty contemporary in terms of what we're seeing today.
Well, thank you, Doctor. Dr. Roberto Olivardia, everyone.
My pleasure.